She arrived with a secret she couldn't hide much longer. The rancher said it didn't matter. The train pulled into Willow Station, Oregon, on a Thursday afternoon in late October, and Ivy Collier stepped onto the platform with one carpet bag, one letter, and one secret that was approximately 5 months along and becoming harder to conceal with each passing week. The letter was from Gideon Thatch. It was the 4th letter he had written and the most direct. He was a sheep rancher. He needed a wife. He had placed an advertisement in a Portland newspaper, and Ivy had answered it from a boarding house in Sacramento, where she had been living since her husband drowned in the American River in June, leaving her with $40, a wedding ring, and a child she had not yet told anyone about. Gideon's letter said he was 34, honest, not handsome, and in possession of 600 sheep and a house that needed a woman in it. He said he would meet her at the station. He said the valley was green in October, and the house was warm in winter, and the sheep were gentle creatures that did not bite, and that the nearest neighbor was 3 miles east, but the road was good. He did not say what he would do if the woman who arrived was not the woman he expected, because he had not imagined that possibility, and Ivy had not given him reason to. Ivy was 25, with dark hair pinned under a traveling hat, and a face that was pretty in the way that tired faces sometimes are, the bones still holding the shape that exhaustion has not yet erased. She had not told Gideon about the baby. She had started to, in her 3rd letter, and then she had crossed out the sentence and written instead about her cooking, which was competent, and her sewing, which was better than competent, and her willingness to work, which was absolute. She had told herself that she would explain when she arrived, that some things are better said in person, that the letter might scare him off, and then where would she be? She had told herself many things. She had composed and discarded a dozen versions of the truth, each one softer than the last, each one designed to deliver the information without delivering the consequence. In the end, she had sent none of them, and the omission sat in her chest, like a stone she carried everywhere, growing heavier with each mile the train covered between Sacramento and Oregon. Gideon Thatch was standing at the end of the platform when the train stopped. He was tall and angular, with a weathered face and large hands, and the particular stillness of a man who spends most of his time with animals rather than people. He was holding his hat in his hands, which were clean and raw-knuckled from work, and wearing a shirt that had been ironed with more care than skill. The creases were sharp but slightly off-center, pressed by a man who understood the principle of ironing, but had limited practice with the execution. It meant he had ironed it himself because there was no one else in his house to do it, and the effort of that ironing told Ivy more about his character than any letter had. He looked nervous in the specific way that men look nervous when they have committed to something significant and are now confronting the reality of it. He saw Ivy step down from the train. He saw the carpet bag and the traveling hat and the face that was prettier than he had allowed himself to expect. He walked toward her with the measured stride of a man crossing a pasture, not hurried, not hesitant, covering ground at the pace that the ground required. Mrs. Collier, Mr. Thatch. They stood on the platform and looked at each other with the careful attention of two people who have agreed to share a life and are now seeing for the first time the person they will share it with. The station was small, a single building with a ticket window and a bench and a posted schedule that optimistically listed 2 trains per day, and the platform was empty except for the 2 of them and a porter loading mail. The wind came down from the Cascades and moved the hem of Ivy's dress, and she pressed her hand against her coat, and Gideon saw the gesture, and something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, not with the shock she had feared, but with the quiet recalibration of a man who has just noticed something he was not expecting and is deciding what it means. He did not say anything about it. Not on the platform, not during the wagon ride to the ranch, not during the long silence that filled the space between them like the October cold. He talked about the sheep and the house, and the road, and the weather, and Ivy answered in the short, careful sentences of a woman who is waiting for the conversation she is dreading, and the conversation did not come. The ranch was 12 miles from town, set in a valley where the grass was still green despite the season, and the hills rose on either side like walls covered in Douglas fir. The house was better than Ivy had expected. Frame construction, not sod or log, with a porch and a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms and a stone fireplace, that Gideon had built himself from river rock. It was clean in the way that a house maintained by a single man is clean. The surfaces wiped, the floors swept, but the rooms empty of the small details that make a house feel occupied. No curtains on the windows, no cloth on the table, no flowers, no pictures, no indication that anyone had ever done more than sleep and eat within those walls. But the wood was good, and the roof was sound, and the fireplace drew well, and Ivy could see in the bones of the house the same qualities she had seen in Gideon's letters. A careful, competent construction that lacked only the warmth that one person cannot provide alone. "The bedroom on the right is yours," Gideon said. "I will take the one on the left until we are married, and after that we can decide what suits." "Thank you. There is food in the kitchen. The stove works. The well is out back." "Thank you." "Mrs. Collier?" "Yes. I noticed something at the station. I expect you know what I noticed." Ivy set down her carpet bag. She stood in the kitchen of the house that was supposed to be her new home and looked at the man who was supposed to be her new husband and felt the weight of every lie she had told by omission settle on her shoulders like a physical thing. "I am carrying a child," she said. "My husband's child. He died before I knew. I should have told you in the letters. I did not, and that was wrong. And if you want me to leave, I will leave on the next train." Gideon looked at her. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. And then he said, "The next train is Tuesday. That is 5 days. You would need somewhere to stay until then. I can find a room in town. You could. Or you could stay here, and we could see whether this changes anything that matters." "It changes everything. It changes one thing. And the one thing it changes is not the thing I was worried about." "What were you worried about?" "That you would not come at all." The arrangement that followed was not what either of them had planned, but it was what the situation required, and both of them were practical enough to accept it. Ivy stayed in the right bedroom. Gideon stayed in the left. She cooked and cleaned and sewed the curtains that the windows had been waiting for. Yellow calico for the kitchen, plain muslin for the bedrooms, and mended 3 shirts she found in a basket by the door, each one torn at the same place on the left sleeve where the fence wire caught. She organized the pantry, which contained enough flour and salt and dried beans to survive a siege, but no variety whatsoever. And she baked bread and pies and a cake that used the last of the sugar, and that Gideon ate with the reverent attention of a man who has not tasted cake in years. He worked the sheep and mended fences and came home each evening to a house that smelled like food and looked like someone lived in it, and neither of them mentioned the baby again for 2 weeks. It was not avoidance. It was patience. The particular patience of people who have learned that some conversations cannot be rushed, that trust is built in days, not hours, and that the most important things are often said last. Ivy learned about Gideon during those 2 weeks. She learned that he rose before dawn and did not complain about it. She learned that he was gentle with the sheep in a way that extended to everything he touched. The horses, the dog, the stove door that stuck, the chair leg that wobbled. He fixed things quietly and thoroughly, without announcing the fixing, so that Ivy would notice a repaired hinge or a leveled table only after the fact. She learned that he read in the evenings, slowly, with his finger tracing the line, and that the books were about agriculture and animal husbandry, and one, surprisingly, was a volume of poetry that had belonged to his mother. She learned that he was lonely, not in the way that lonely people broadcast their loneliness, with complaints and sighs and the performance of suffering, but in the way that lonely people reveal it inadvertently, through the speed with which they respond to conversation, the care with which they listen, the gratitude that surfaces in small gestures. He brought her firewood without being asked. He carried water without being asked. He asked about her day with a sincerity that suggested the answer mattered to him, and he listened to her answers the way the valley listened to rain, with the attentiveness of something that has been dry for a long time. On the 15th day, Ivy felt the baby move. She was standing at the kitchen window watching Gideon bring the sheep down from the upper pasture, and the movement came, not the fluttering she had felt before, but a definite kick, a declaration of presence, a small foot or hand pushing against the wall of the world it had not yet entered. She put her hand on her belly and stood at the window and watched the sheep come down the hill like a white river flowing through the green valley, and Gideon walked behind them with his dog at his side and his crook in his hand and his face turned toward the house, and she understood that the thing she had been afraid of, his rejection, his anger, his insistence that she leave, was not going to happen. It had not happened in 15 days, and it was not going to happen because the man walking down the hill was not a man who sent people away. He was a man who brought them in. That evening, after supper, Gideon sat in his chair by the fire and opened his book, and then closed it again, and looked at Ivy, who was sewing a hem on a curtain for the second bedroom window. "I would like to say something," he said, "and I would like to say it once and then not need to say it again." Ivy set down the curtain. "All right. When I placed the advertisement, I was looking for a wife. I was not looking for a particular kind of wife. I was looking for a person who would be honest with me and work beside me and make this house into something more than a place where I sleep. You have done all 3 of those things in 15 days. He paused. The fire crackled. The dog sighed. "The child is part of you. The child will be part of this house. And if you will have me, the child will be mine in every way that matters." Ivy's hands were still on the curtain. She looked at Gideon Thatch, this quiet, angular, lonely man who had ironed his own shirt to meet her at the station and brought her firewood without being asked, and read poetry by firelight, and walked behind 600 sheep each day with the patience of a man who understood that patience was not weakness, but the strongest form of love he knew how to offer. "You are a better man than I deserve," she said. "That is not true, and even if it were, it would not change the offer." Then yes. They were married the following week by the minister in Willow Station, in a ceremony attended by the storekeeper and his wife, and a sheepdog named Drum, who sat outside the church and waited with the tolerance of an animal that had learned to wait for everything. Ivy wore a dress she had altered to accommodate the truth she was no longer hiding, and Gideon wore the shirt he had ironed for the station, re-ironed for the occasion, and they stood before the minister and made promises that both of them intended to keep. The baby came in February, on a night when snow lay thick on the valley, and the sheep were gathered close to the barn, and the fire in the stone hearth burned steady and warm. The wind came down from the mountains and pressed against the house like something testing the walls, and the walls held because Gideon had built them to hold, and the woman inside them held because she had been holding for 9 months and was ready to be done. Gideon boiled water and heated blankets and held Ivy's hand through the worst of it, and did not leave the room, not once, through the 8 hours it took for his son to arrive. His son. He said the words for the first time when the midwife placed the baby in his arms, a red, furious, squalling boy with dark hair like his mother's, and fists like a man who intended to hold on to whatever he was given. "My son," Gideon said. He said it quietly, the way he said everything, but the quietness was not lack of feeling. It was the sound of a man who has found the thing he did not know he was missing, and recognizes it immediately and completely, the way a valley recognizes rain. They named him Thomas, after Ivy's first husband, because Gideon said that a boy should carry the name of the man who gave him life, and the love of the man who chose to raise him, and there was room enough for both. Ivy held the baby and looked at Gideon, and saw on his face an expression she had never seen before. Not on Thomas Collier, not on any man. It was the expression of a person who has been given something he did not earn, and does not intend to waste, and it was the most honest thing she had ever seen. The sheep rancher and the woman who arrived with a secret she could not hide built a life in the valley beneath the Cascades, the house filled with curtains and laughter, and the sounds of a child learning to walk on floors that had once been silent. Gideon taught Thomas to count by counting sheep, and Ivy watched from the porch as the boy and the man walked the pastures together, and the secret that had brought her to Willow Station in fear became the truth that kept her there in love.